We are joined by the voice of the Gamecock women's basketball program, who's out of fingers and toes to put rings on, but hoping to add another one here soon. Brad Muller, it's an hour earlier in Birmingham, but I'm quite sure you've probably been up for a little while.
Yeah,
as things get rolling along, man. Thank you for joining us. How are you? How's the flight?
No, it was easy. It's a lot better flying to Birmingham than flying to Spokane,
right,
where the other regional is. So yeah, it was a pretty uneventful trip. So far, we're about 100 yards from the SEC offices here, so it's a good place to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, probably familiar territory, that's for sure. What's the schedule today?
They got practice coming up in a couple hours, and they got to do all the media stuff where they meet with all the ESPN folks, do all their one-on-ones for all the fluff pieces that they'll put on the TV broadcast and all that. It's funny because it's not like they haven't met with our players all year long, but they try to find something new. So they'll have that in between practices today, and then it's crowded. You don't get a ton of time on the arena floor for your practice. So sometimes they'll have practice elsewhere as well. Because remember, with women's basketball now, it's basically a double regional. There's two regionals happening here. The bracket that South Carolina is in is Friday, Sunday, and then the other Birmingham bracket is Saturday, Monday. So you're going to have a lot of teams, on the floor for a short practice today.
Yeah, I would imagine that the fine folks of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, would rather be in Birmingham than in Spokane, Washington.
Yeah. Yes.
Same thing with their counterparts, NC State. But this is going to be a slam-packed deal over the next couple of days. For those that maybe haven't seen it closely, obviously the Gamecocks have the fourth-seeded Terps tomorrow at 5 o'clock on ESPN. Of course, Brad will have it on the radio. Which we encourage you to listen, do like baseball,
right.
mute, listen. But Duke and North Carolina play right before that, which is going to be something in that arena. And then you've also got Notre Dame and TCU down there, and Texas and Tennessee.
Yeah.
They're going to play the final game in Birmingham on Saturday afternoon at 3:30 as part of the Sweet 16. So the fan bases, I mean, we know how South Carolina travels. We know Tennessee travels. We know Texas travels. And I doubt Duke and North Carolina folks are going to miss an opportunity to travel either. So I would imagine it's quite the spectacle.
Yeah, it's going to be crowded here. And, yeah, I anticipate a ton of garnet and black when South Carolina is playing. And, yeah, you got to love it on the other side or as part of South Carolina's bracket with Duke and North Carolina, meeting in the NCAA tournament. I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, I think they played just a couple of times during the regular season, did not play. Duke won the conference tournament over NC State, but you got to love that, playing your arch rival, lose or go home. That'll be a great atmosphere. I'm looking forward just to watching that the game before we go on the air.
Yeah, so if Carolina gets through Maryland, that's who they get. One of those two teams. A shade of blue will be next for South Carolina. All right, Brad, fill us in on Maryland. What do we know about them? They're coming off of a high-flying, high-scoring 2 double overtime victory over fifth-seeded Alabama. For anybody that missed that, it was 111 to 108. You don't see those scores very often in women's basketball, overtime or not. So we do know that they can put some points on the board.
Yeah, second highest scoring game in NCAA women's tournament history. It was a great game. They Maryland battled back. They were down 17 points in the second half and came back and won against a good Alabama team. That tells you a little something about Maryland's ability to put points on the board. Rallying from 17 points in the second half, and they're very guard oriented. Their posts aren't huge, which makes it a better matchup for South Carolina as opposed to the Texases and the UCLAs that have 6'5" and 6'7". Their post players are around 6'2", but their guards are big. They've got guards that are 6'1", 6'2" as well, so that makes it a little bit challenging. They spread their offense around. Their top scorers are guards. 3 of their guards average double figures. One of them, Kayleen Smichael's averaging about 18 points per game. They get to the free throw line a ton, and that'll be something to watch in this game is how the game is called, because South Carolina is a very physical defensive team. And if it's one of those things where if you bat an eyelash, and they call a foul, that could favor Maryland, because they get to the line a lot. They led the Big Ten in free throw attempts. I think they're number 2 in the nation in free throw attempts, and they shoot free throws really well. They've got one young lady. They've got a couple actually that are 3 of their starting guards shoot over 80% from the foul line. One of them, Cheyenne Sellers, who shoots a ton of free throws. She's got, she's one of those ones that, I think she's hit like 15 of her last 16 or something like that. They've got another one that's shooting 95% from the line. They just don't miss. So if you get into a free throw shooting contest, it might not go our way.
Is this team returning a lot of faces from last year's matchup as well, Brad? Is this going to be a familiarity thing here?
It's a little bit of both. They've got some key players back. Cheyenne Sellers, who's their big guard, who's one of their second leading scorer, is back. But they've got Sarah Tibiasu, transferred from Virginia Commonwealth. She was the player of the year in the Atlantic 10 last year. So that was a big portal pickup for them. She's averaging double figures. She's a really good 3-point shooter. So that adds another element to them. And Smichael, who's their leading scorer, actually transferred from Rutgers. She was the first team all Big Ten player this year for them. So that was another big pickup. Some of their other role players are returning from last year, but 2 of their main starters came in through the portal. So this is a better team than we saw last year when South Carolina defeated Maryland during the regular season.
Yeah, it's a pretty well balanced team, honestly, especially from a scoring standpoint. I was going to ask you how you say that. Tibiasu.
Yeah.
Tibiasu. Yeah. So primarily, I think it's something like 55% or something like that. 60% of her shots are from beyond the arc. Isn't that correct?
Yep. Yeah, that's right. And she's shooting 45% from behind the arc. It's pretty good clip. So, you can't give her practice shots. Obviously, you got to have a hand in her face, expect to see, dribble drive and kick outs to her, hoping that the defense is going to collapse and help out, on any passes inside or any drives inside, and you leave a player, you leave her open for 3 and she's going to knock them down. So that's where the defense is going to have to keep their discipline and always have, at least contest her shots and make her uncomfortable, because if you give her practice shots, it's going to be a long day.
Yeah, I noticed too, the good teams in women's college basketball, well, both the men and the women, quite frankly, but the good teams make it a point to challenge themselves in the non-conference. Of course, playing in the Big Ten, they had a chance to run up against UCLA and Southern Cal this year. Man, I hate that Juju.
Yeah, doesn't that sound weird?
Yeah, I know. I know. I still can't.
Yeah, I have this reaction in me when I hear some of this stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of
Hey, I still think of Maryland is ACC, but that's that's
right.
long since past. Yeah.
What in the world is the ACC doing?
Yeah, that sentence was loaded with triggers.
Yeah. Showing our age and all these. Yeah.
They did play Duke, who they should play a lot more in the non-con this year. Who do you think that they have faced that is close or closest resembles the Gamecocks?
You talking about Maryland?
Yep.
Good question, because the Big Ten is pretty diverse because of the additions of UCLA and Southern Cal. Obviously, UCLA is its own unique animal because of the size they have, which would be similar to Texas, really. Southern Cal is unique. Obviously, Juju Watkins, who's unfortunately out now. They've got a lot of talent as well, but that Juju is such a volume shooter. I'm trying to think who would be similar, at least in the Big Ten, to what South Carolina has faced. We, other than the West Coast Big Ten teams, we haven't seen a ton of other Big Ten teams this year. I mean, we see more of the ACC and some we've seen the TCUs and things like that. So off the top of my head, I'm not sure who would be more identical to South Carolina, but Maryland is somewhat similar. They've got just in their own right because they have a lot of guards who can score. Their posts aren't big, but are effective. Or they've got some large guards. One of their posts, Ali Kubek's only 6'2", who's she's good. She's not going to wow you with her numbers. It's kind of similar to South Carolina's post with Sanaya Fagan. If you let her go, she's going to score on you. But for the most part, she's going to hover around 8 or 9 points a game, grab some rebounds and things like that. But if you leave her alone, she's going to finish under the basket. So, I think they're actually similar with some of their personnel with South Carolina themselves.
And for what it's worth, they did face Texas in the Coretta Scott King Classic back in January, and Texas beat the brakes off of them, 89 to 51. It was almost a 40-point difference up there in Newark. South Carolina has not lost since the UConn game. Go back to this Indiana game this past last weekend, 64-53 the final score. Brad, we mentioned on Monday, I applaud Indiana. I thought that Indiana, played about as well as they could against the Gamecocks on their home floor. I mean, they only scored 53 points, of course. That's a tribute to the Gamecocks defense, which is elite. But overall, I mean, Carolina was able to kind of continue to grow that thing and get a nice comfortable lead and hang on to it and win fairly comfortably. But give us a recap of what happened in those 4 quarters and how prepared they are coming out of that regional.
Yeah, it was interesting because coming off the first round win against an overmatched Tennessee Tech team, you were feeling really well that South Carolina had picked up where it left off from the SEC tournament, where they were playing some of their best basketball of the year, which is what you want, right, going into March. But then it felt like in terms of performance, they took a little step back against Indiana. And now Indiana's a good program. This is the third time we've played them since I've been here. And they beat us once back in the year the NCAA tournament was canceled because of COVID. That was the only team that beat Carolina that year. And they were very good last year. The Gamecocks beat them in the Sweet 16, but it was a 4-point game. So systematically, they're very similar from year to year, even if they don't have the same personnel. On paper, South Carolina was the much better team. Indiana played well, but I think part of it too was South Carolina just wasn't sharp in that game. Just some of the decision making, some of the shot selection early. I think part of it, Chloe Kitts got into early foul trouble, and she's sort of been the go-to person for the Gamecocks the last week of the regular season and through the SEC tournament. She's really been the one. I mean, there's been a lot of people, but she's kind of been, the top banana, if you will, for this bunch. And you saw that when she came out in the third quarter, or when she got back into the game in the third quarter after sitting much of the first half with foul trouble, boom, the offense started clicking. So it just feels like right now a lot is flowing through Chloe Kitts being on the floor and her finishing, hitting mid-range and things like that. It was just one of those things where South Carolina just didn't have its best stuff for a lot of that game. Still enough to win, and that's all you want in March is to win. Hopefully they've got the good stuff, here in Birmingham, because you get to this point, especially, where we're at now with women's basketball. If you have an off day shooting, or if you're just not clicking a little bit like they weren't in that first half, especially in that first quarter against Indiana, you can get beat. Even if you're one seed, you can lose in the Sweet 16, because when you get to this point, everyone else has got some horses and they're good enough to beat you if you take a couple of quarters off.
Yeah, of course she still finished with a double-double.
Yeah.
Which is, which is just such a hat tip to how she has evolved as a basketball player. To your point, she's kind of the centerpiece right now of what's going on. How about, let's talk about MiLaysia. I think she only played maybe 9 or 10 minutes in the game the other day. Well, what would you see out of her?
I think it was other combinations were working.
Mm-hmm.
MiLaysia always does something exciting. And there are days where she certainly carries the team, and there are some days where maybe it's just not there for. Maybe the shot selection isn't great. Sometimes I think what gets her into trouble is sometimes if she jacks up a 3 a little bit early in the shot clock, when she's going to have more success going to the rim or working the ball around a little bit. But I think the bigger part of it was other kids were just really playing well. And sometimes you just go with the hot hands. And I think she handled it really well. Just when you saw her body language on the bench, she still seemed very engaged in the game. I think it was just one of those games where maybe a couple of things weren't working for her initially, but they were working for some of the other players, coming off the bench. And you just went with the hot hand. And it was just as simple as that, because, South Carolina commonly this year is going to play 10 or 11. And if you're not one of the hot hands that day, hey, we're going to go with the other one, because I think it was just the flow of the game where other folks were playing well on both ends of the floor, and you didn't want to mess with a good thing on that particular day.
Yeah, well, you don't have a choice with Dawn. You can't pout on the bench. That's not how this works.
Yeah,
in South Carolina, and you don't see that ever. Actually, to your point,
it means she's probably going to, I won't say bounce back, but it means she's probably going to be due for a big game, tomorrow, because that's just how it works when you're playing 8, 9, 10 folks, that the baton kind of gets tossed in terms of who's going to, lead the team from game to game. So maybe tomorrow will be her turn.
Brad Muller, the voice of the Gamecocks, joining us. It is 9:23 his time, 10:23 our time. As far as specifically in this ball game tomorrow, Brad, early on in the game, we know that South Carolina can score. We know that. Now, there are days when maybe they don't score like other days, of course, but we know that they can. And you mentioned Maryland just a little while ago, and the fact that they certainly can. What are some early indicators in this ball game of maybe how things might go? It's not always what's going to determine the outcome, certainly, but what type of game we could be looking at besides the officiating. I know you mentioned the officiating.
Yeah,
besides that.
I think that's a big part of it. Of what's a foul and what's not a foul will be big early, and how you react to that. It's kind of like adjusting to a strike zone. You're going to have to adjust to that in the first inning and figure it out. But other than that, for me, it's always the old school thing, and it's a lot of how Coach Staley designs her offenses is can we get the bigs involved early? Because if you can do that, it just sets up everything else. If you can get Fagan and Kitts and Joyce Edwards coming off the bench, if you can get them involved early offensively and grabbing some defensive boards, limiting shots, it just sets everything else up, because you get the quick defensive rebound. Okay, now you can get your transition offense going where South Carolina does excel. Even when they go to their bench. And then the other part of it, if the inside game's working early on and you're able to make good entry passes to Fagan and Kitts or Joyce coming off the bench, that opens things up for your guards. And, you've got good shooters. And just like we were talking about with Maryland, you give people like, Tessa Johnson and Tahina Pau, some practice shots, where they're not well contested, they're going to knock them down. So I think it always starts with inside, and if you're able to get something inside with Fagan and Kitts early, and maybe get a little transition offense going early as well.
I was looking at some of the stats this morning with Maryland. Correct me if I'm wrong here. Do they average 13 offensive rebounds a game?
I think that's right, because they're a good rebounding team. They're numbers wise in terms of rebound differential, they're I think almost identical to South Carolina. They're second in the Big Ten in rebound margin, which is where you want to be. So they, even though they're not huge, most of their taller players on the floor are only 6'2", which is not very big. They rebound. Their guards rebound, and with a game like this where neither team is excessive in size and in the post, that it's going to be those hustle stats of kids who are crashing the boards and boxing out. It's going to be the want to, who it sounds so cliche, but who wants to get the rebounds, because both these teams are about equal statistically. And the height matchups are pretty good.
Yeah, that's what was when I saw that, because I think they average around 40 boards a game total. So if you do the math on that, they get about half of the defensive rebounds on the offensive side, 13, 27, I guess my math. I know you're not the best math guy, but I think
I don't do math. I have trouble with the time difference.
Yeah, that's right. I think I'm in the ballpark there.
Yeah.
But if there's anything that I think that, the fans could ever look to with South Carolina from time to time and question, especially maybe earlier in games, I wouldn't say later in games, are they getting beat on the boards based on that want to? And I'm not calling them lazy or anything. That's not what I'm saying. It's not an extreme comment. I don't mean it that way. But sometimes it's like, oh, we kind of need to turn it up a little bit here and make sure that we're getting on it. And so I wanted to make sure I threw that out there to you, because I'm sure that's something that Dawn's going to be zeroed in on in that first and second quarter.
Yeah, and that's just fundamental stuff, boxing out and crashing, and you can see it. When there's guards from our team or other teams who are active, after a shot goes up of crashing the boards, and not, sometimes you just get caught staring at it. And it's easy to see, from where our perspective of who's looking for a rebound and who's just watching the ball go up. And so hopefully, it sounds like something from Hoosiers, don't get caught watching the paint dry, get up there, you got to get there and get after it, especially from your perimeter players. So that'll be something to watch early, because again, the height matchups are pretty even.
Yeah, and the other thing too, and Maryland's one of these teams. I mean, they're used to the moment, but this is just another game for South Carolina. I mean, it's it's the Sweet 16. It's a big deal to all of us. I know it's a big deal to them, that the fact that they're there, but they're so used to it. I always am interested in seeing the teams that aren't used to it. And I remember Brad in 2017. I remember I talked to Frank after they had made the Final Four run, and it was just a side conversation basically. And I was like, what in during all this, during this last couple of weeks, what was the biggest challenge? And he was like, well, honestly, we had a bunch of older guys here, so that made things easier, but it was the newness of everything. I mean, these guys were getting pulled in every which direction, and they're doing video here, and then they're doing photos here, and they're having to talk to people from 40 states away that they've never met before. And it's just a lot coming at them. And meanwhile, I'm trying to keep them focused on basketball. Of course, he did a pretty good job of that.
Yeah.
But this team, they step into this, they're used to all this. This is like being at home, essentially. I mean, they're always being banged on, right? For more. We need this, and we need this, and we need this, and we need this from you. So this is just another day to these young ladies.
Well, yeah, I mean, think about it, especially when you look at the seniors and the juniors. They've been to the Final Four every year of their career. They've been a part of 2 national championships. They've been part of an undefeated season. They also, were a part of the team that went to a Final Four where their only loss of the season was in the Final Four. So this is where they expect to be at the end of the year. Is I don't think there's nerves when you get to a matchup in the Sweet 16. This is just another step to ultimately where they want to be. It doesn't mean they can't be beat, but yeah, I think the distractions are a little bit less because this is just part of their every year. This is what they do.
Well, and I think that also is an opportunity to extend a compliment to Joyce Edwards. I mean, because she's a freshman, and sometimes the lights come on when you're a freshman on this big stage. Of course, she has all the support around her in the world, but I don't even know how much of that she really needs sometimes. I mean, she is just as cool as a cucumber always.
Yeah, she's a lot of fun to watch. And one of the things that that I've been impressed with her since she got here is she's so smart. At the beginning of the year in November, you could tell the game was moving kind of fast for her, and then it was fun to watch things slow down. And she really turned it up a notch during SEC play. And I'm looking for big things out of her. I'm hoping she has a good game tomorrow, because I'll be honest with you, against Indiana, she didn't have one of her better games where she was doing some things that I hadn't seen her do in a while. Turn the ball over a little bit, shuffling the feet a little. She was just a little bit out of it. So I'm hoping she's back to where she's been, because she's been playing at a pretty high level for a freshman most of the year, especially in SEC play. And that's something for a kid, first year out of high school, coming off the bench, and oh, by the way, you're the team's leading scorer. And she's only going to get better. And from where she was in November to where she is now is pretty remarkable. And it's just reps, getting out there and playing. And she's been huge for South Carolina all year. And I'm hoping she has a good game tomorrow. Kind of, I guess she was due for a game that was below her usual efforts. She didn't have her best game against Indiana, but I hopefully she'll bounce back and play a little bit better tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, I get it. You expect her to play great every time she steps on the floor. Now she's kind of a phenom, but it's going to happen, just like it's going to happen to every single other player on this team and every other team out there.
Yep.
There's just going to be a day where it's just not all going to be there. Raven Johnson is a young lady who from time to time, of course, can have some struggles offensively. Of course, she's also very capable offensively, but you can't question her on defense. And or at least I don't. Maybe somebody does, but Brad, I don't. I love watching her play out there. Give us a little bit more on Raven Johnson and what she means to this team.
Well, she, obviously being a starting point guard for all these years, and the things she's learned, and you make a good point on defense. She's named to the SEC All Defensive Team this year, and her defense helps create offense. When she pokes balls away, creates opportunities, creates the transition offense. That's how she likes to play. She likes to go. She likes to go fast. I think if it was up to her, she'd try to run a fast break, every possession down the floor, because she can I think that's when she's at her best. That's when she sees the floor really well, is when she's moving. Offensively, she can do some good things driving to the basket. Sometimes I think she settles a little bit, on the perimeter when she hasn't been a great 3-point shooter this year compared to last year, but she has come up clutch. But her defense is huge because Coach Daly is always going to talk about cutting the head off the snake, and that's the opposing team's point guard, and that's what Raven is charged with doing. Sometimes the key to a defense, the key to slowing down, let's say, a good post player is defending the point guard well. If you're harassing the point guard where she's uncomfortable and can't make clean and accurate post entry passes to the big, well, that makes everybody else's job easier on defense. And Raven is a big part of that, of harassing the other point guard and just making them uncomfortable. When she's got things going, it's a lot of fun to watch because she's got, kind of like MiLaysia Fulwiley, she's got that other gear sometimes that not everybody has.
They've all got a gear that I don't have. I can tell you that now. I mean, man, some of them and TV never does it justice. You got to go actually see them,
right?
And then you're looking around going, "What? Yeah, this is night and day." Well, I'm pulling for Raven Johnson. I like her. She's an outstanding human, great teammate. I think she's got a big weekend ahead of her. I think she's going to be very important in all this. Is there a Duke or North Carolina? If Carolina, if the real Carolina, if they get through this ball game tomorrow, is there a preference or a better matchup between one of those two in the Elite Eight?
I think Duke is the better team overall. I think Duke has a little more depth. Obviously if South Carolina wins, you're hoping that Duke and North Carolina go to triple overtime or whatever and just wear themselves out a little bit or something like that. That's always the dream. But I think Duke is the better team on paper. So, if you're South Carolina and you win, you'd like to have the team that maybe hasn't been as consistently good. I don't think North Carolina is as deep. Some of their individual players are fantastic. Alyssa Usby, who's been there, feels like forever, is a wing player that just does everything for them. I mean, she's a nightmare matchup because of what she can do. They've got some 3-point shooters, but I think North Carolina has a little less depth than Duke. So, certainly with South Carolina's depth, I think that would create a better matchup. Obviously we saw Duke this year, beat them at Colonial Life Arena. We've seen Duke actually 2 years in a row. We did see North Carolina last year at their place as part of the SEC ACC Challenge. So we are familiar with most of their personnel. So there's not a distinct advantage. They know ours as well. Not a distinct advantage either way. But I think Duke is the better team. So if you're looking, for an upset, then maybe if you're a South Carolina fan, you want North Carolina to win because of, South Carolina has a little more depth, I believe.
We'll see. They split the season series, the Blue Devils and the Tar Heels, and they're playing for the third time this year. What an opportunity in the Sweet 16. That's going to be really special. Craig asked you, but Craig spelled it wrong. He said, how many fans are there from South Carolina? He meant fams, of course. We know what he meant, Brad. I know we kind of hit on this at the top of the segment here, but I would imagine there's a whole hell of a lot.
Yeah, I'm going to head out a little bit and walk around, but I imagine they'll be arriving today and tonight. But I fully anticipate that the arena is going to be mostly garnet and black because from Columbia, it's about a 5-hour drive or so. Yeah. So this is an easy one for our fans to get to. So I imagine it's going to be very loud, and maybe tonight walking around when I'm just strolling, around some of the establishments today that later today, that there'll be a lot of garnet and black, people waving. So I'm looking forward to heading out and seeing a lot of familiar faces.
You hear that, Mad Dog? Strolling around establishments. He's going to be Carolina's version of Harry Doyle tomorrow, courtside for the ball game at 4:30 airtime.
Hello, if I turn the radio on and it sounds like that, I'll just love every minute of it.
After the game.
They do that as session tickets, Brad, at this level at the Sweet 16? Do you get like morning session, afternoon session? Is that how it is, or is it game to game?
2 games a day. So
it's 2. I thought they were doing 4.
I think you buy the day, don't you?
Yeah, I think you buy the day. That's the way it was in first and second round. At our place is, if you had a ticket for the first game, you had a ticket for the second game.
That's cool. I like that about the tournament vibe, because then you get other people start cheering for you or against you, depending on what they feel. So that's always fun.
Oh, the hell with it. Nobody's listening anyway.
That's right.
I don't think that's going to be the case.
No.
Yeah, right. Yeah, unfortunately, in your sport, Brad, at this
Yeah.
school, that's not true.
Everybody's listening.
Yeah.
Before I let you run to pivot, because we didn't do it last week, we ran out of time, and I have made it a point to not do that today with what's going on with Ashley and the softball program. I know you wish you could be two places at one time right now because they're going to be in Baton Rouge for a top 10 matchup, essentially is what it is. Top 5 when it comes to the RPI. But they shut out the Tigers the other night. Rhodey's healthy. She hits a ball out of the yard. Wow, man, she is something. Goodness gracious.
I tell you what, if folks haven't been out there yet, even if you're not a huge softball fan, going out and check them out, because obviously I've worked softball for a long time and I enjoy the game, but these kids, these young ladies on the softball team that coach has brought in, and the ones that were returning, they're fantastic. They're terrific kids, and they're obviously really good softball players. And it's a terrific story with everything they've been doing so far this year. You got a lot of kids that transferred from mid majors that are showing they can play, at this level. And every week they're playing nationally ranked teams in the SEC, and they're competing, and they've just got, I'll pull out all the cliches, this bulldog mentality with how they play. Sam Gress is the pitcher who they brought in from Charlotte that was struggling a little bit at the start of the season. And now she goes in and she just gets outs, whether she's starting or coming out of the bullpen, she just gets outs. And it's been fun to watch. Rhodey, who was an All-American last year at Charlotte, she's picking up where she left off. Tough kid, former high school hockey player. She's just hitting bombs. She's in the top 5 in the SEC in home runs, and tough kid. Lexi Winters, the catcher, transfer from Charlotte, who's fantastic defensively, has been a clutch hitter for them. It's a really fun and interesting group. And it's neat to see people kind of jumping on the bandwagon. They had a packed house the other day for the game against Clemson, and how it is, the more you win, the more people are going to come check you out. So I encourage people, the next home series to get on out there. It's a really neat group, and they're doing some good things. It's going to be a grind every weekend in the SEC, playing nationally ranked teams every week. But I would say Coach Ashley Chastain Woodard is ahead of schedule with what she's doing.
Oh, what? Yeah, way ahead of schedule. I mean, she is a great coach, number one, and she's an even better person. That should tell you all you need to know. But when you watch them play, there's one word that comes to mind every time I watch them: fun. They're just fun. They're fun to watch.
They're a tremendous group of young ladies, and I've had the chance to do a lot of one-on-ones with them. Some of the players, just for stories I do for the athletics department website, and they've all got some really neat, interesting stories. And what I love, kind of a common theme, is hometown heroes. Yeah, because there was a lot of kids on this team that grew up as South Carolina fans and maybe weren't recruited here. Their recruiting didn't work out, so they started somewhere else. And then when Coach Ash got hired here, there was a relationship because a lot of them went to camps that she was working at or whatever, and they all wanted to come here. And she brought them all, from different schools or even where she was at Charlotte, and they're back where they wanted to be. There was a bunch of kids that went to camps here as little kids. This is where they always wanted to play, and now they are, and they're making the most of it. And it's just really neat to see, these how bought in they are. They've always wanted to be Gamecocks, and now they're doing great things.
They are. There's no doubt about that. And we can't wait to watch them tomorrow night. I mentioned to Phil, I don't know how I'm going to pull this thing off, but you got basketball, baseball, softball, and I got to keep our eyes on, Tennessee, Kentucky tomorrow night on the men's side.
No.
They all deserve a screen, Brad. You can't do split screen with some of this stuff, especially a couple of the things have to be streamed. So I got to figure this is a debacle. I got to figure all this out before tomorrow. Certain times we wish we could trade seats with certain people, and this is one of them. I wish I could be in yours this weekend. Hopefully calling another march to the Final Four for Dawn Staley and her women's basketball program. It should be a tremendous time in Birmingham. Go get them. It's a 4:30 airtime tomorrow, correct?
Correct. Yeah, 4:30, and we'll be on 107.5 The Game in Columbia, or just use the Gamecocks app, and we'll be on there 4:30 Eastern time, and tip off at 5.
Can't wait. Brad, thank you for all of your time. We really appreciate it. Enjoy the establishments.
Absolutely. You guys have a great weekend, and hopefully we're talking again soon about a Final Four
next week. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We're gonna be dressed in Final Four gear around here. Get it at GamecockTraditions.com. Good plug for them right there. Thanks, Brad.
Thanks, guys. Have a good week.
There you go, Brad Muller.